Business Legal Club is a one-stop shop for your business legal needs. You do not need to join the Business Legal Club to benefit from free consultations with leading UK solicitors. You can also access pay-as-you-go online legal documents in HR, employment, debt and commercial law. Our Business Legal Club membership packages start from £50 per month and provide a 30-day money-back guarantee, savings on legal fees with leading solicitors, unlimited usage of in-house HR, employment, debt and commercial interactive documents, fully outsourced HR and employment law solutions with leading employment solicitors who provide a telephone support service, training, audits, documents and insurance to protect your business, plus savings in the Business Services Club. Our Business Legal Club solicitors have been cherry-picked due to their expertise and great value pricing. Our solicitors include national award winners and top 100 rated firms. When you need legal advice and support for your business, contact the Business Legal Club to receive a free consultation with our leading solicitors. For more information, visit thebusinesslegalclub.co.uk. Today, we are going to be discussing the biggest HR issues facing businesses going into 2020. And I am delighted to be joined by Michael McNally from Free Solicitors, who is making his debut on the show. This video does not constitute legal advice, and if you want legal advice, please get in touch with us so we can put you in touch with one of our leading solicitors, like Michael, to assist. Now that the housekeeping's out the way, Michael, can you tell us what some of the biggest issues facing businesses are in HR?
So what I was thinking, Sean, is what the biggest issues are will depend on what sector you're in, the size of business, what your objectives are, where you're at in the life cycle of the business. But what today I've done is chose 5 subjects that I think certainly 1 or 2 will be on everyone's list. So they are the general election, which is coming up as we record, the issues around Brexit and immigration. There's some changes around how contractors are engaged, which is fairly complicated, but we'll go into briefly. There's changes in terms of the obligations around the written particulars of employment that employers must provide to all workers. And then I thought finally we could look at a fairly broad topic of culture and some issues around that.
Fantastic. Well, let's get started with the general election. Now, when this video is released, we'll know the result. We're not going to get into what results we all want. But Michael, can you tell us a bit more about how you think the election might affect businesses and HR professionals?
Around the election, from an employment lawyer's point of view, the most exciting, and from a business's point of view, possibly the most scary element is if we had a Labour government or a Labour-led government, because Labour have said this is going to be the biggest rollout of workers' rights in history, and some of the changes that Labour are proposing are potentially huge. So, for example, there's the proposal of a real living wage of £10 for everyone 60 and over, the ability of employees to collectively own 10% of the company that they work for. There's certainly going to be greater powers for trade unions. There's a proposal that there will be sectoral collective bargaining, so effectively different sectors will have sector-wide minimum terms and conditions that all employers within that sector must comply with. And another potentially big one is over 10 years Labour are aiming to get to a average working week of 32 hours, which is a 4-day working week. So certainly if Labour-led government, some massive changes for employers. Even if it's not a Labour in power, it'll be interesting to see which of these policies could potentially be picked up by other parties at future elections, which we've obviously seen happen in the past. From my point of view, I've done a lot of trade union work, advising employers on recognition, industrial action, and the issues around greater powers for trade unions, sectoral collective bargaining. That is potentially the biggest as I see it, because lots of employers won't have experience of working with trade unions. And in my experience, introducing employers to trade unions and developing that relationship is a big job and there's a lot of upheaval. So that, I think, is going to be, if any of that comes in, that will be the biggest impact on employers' business in the short and medium term.
Building that rapport with the trade unions, making sure that everything's smooth.
Exactly, and
it being a positive for all parties.
Oh, that's where it should get to. But some of initially, some of it can obviously be resistance from an employer's point of view. Some of the laws and rights are quite complicated. But at the end, if you get to a good working relationship, it can be beneficial for both parties to have union involvement, in my experience.
I was interested by the working week stuff. I think people forget that we used to have a 6-day working week. That was the norm. It became 5. There's obviously been huge headlines about potentially going down to 4. I think whether people like it or not, over the next 5 or 10 years, businesses are going to change enormously.
Yeah, definitely.
AI is going to be one of the biggest things that's ever happened to a number of different industries. Technological advances too. When you think of things like driverless cars, haulage, fleet, things like that. Yeah. Regretfully, I suppose, why would you employ human beings when you can have these vehicles go for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without any human error potentially in there? So I think over the next 5 or 10 years, irrelevant of any reduction in the working week by government, I think there's going to be huge changes to various sectors. Hopefully, obviously, lawyers will always be needed, eh, Michael?
There'll always be lawyers.
So moving on to Brexit and immigration, you can't avoid Brexit right now. But if you're and obviously it's going to be sector specific too, but if you're a business owner, you're a HR professional, do you want to tell us a bit about how you think Brexit and immigration is going to have an impact, and what should professionals be doing right now?
So I'm an employment lawyer, but Brexit is something, we've got a specialist team at Freet that do business immigration. And it's certainly something I thought we should mention, because obviously EU workers, there's a lot of EU nationals who work in the UK. They can work in the UK in the same way British nationals can. But as a result of Brexit and as of now, EU citizens have got to start applying for settled status if they intend to stay after Brexit and work here. So that's obligations around immigration that didn't exist before the Brexit issue came up. So employers are going to have to familiarise themselves with those obligations and make sure that they are compliant with those obligations. And on a more general issue around immigration, the Conservatives are saying that if they win power, that they will introduce a Australian-style points-based system. Now that, together with the Brexit, could see considerable impact on businesses, not just around their obligations, but also, are there going to be enough workers coming into the country? Are the right workers going to be coming into the country?
Recruitment.
It's and anecdotally, I understand in certain industries they're already seeing the impact of we haven't Brexited yet, but Brexit being on the table and fewer people coming into certain industries. What to do? The important thing is make sure you realise that if you were going to be employing EU nationals or nationals from outside of the EU, there are obligations upon you as a business. Those obligations are fairly onerous, and the consequences of not following them are particularly serious. But if you take advice and you comply with those obligations, it can make for obviously a more diverse and better workforce. So the important thing is accept you have those obligations and put in place steps to ensure you're complying and continue to comply with your obligations. And just a brief plug, Freets have a Brexit newsletter that people can sign up to, and that contains a lot of information. It's produced mainly by our immigration team, and that contains a lot of information around Brexit and immigration changes that are in place and are coming about going forward.
Yeah, and that's a great point just to reinforce with the Business Legal Club. You don't have to be a member. If you want to get legal advice in any area, business, employment, HR, commercial, debt, whatever it may be, you get a free consultation. Of course, if you are a member of one of our HR and employment packages, you get a discount on any legal fees. And I'm very proud that one of our HR packages that you can select from involves Michael and Freeth, so you benefit from their expertise on that too. Consultants and off-pay working in the private sector. Very common, very widespread. I plead my ignorance. I was unaware of changes coming in, I believe in April 2020 about this. Michael, would you like to tell us a bit more about that and how that's going to impact upon people?
Sure. I'll keep it simple so I don't confuse myself first of all and anyone watching, but off-payroll working is essentially when, or what we're concerned about with these changes is when an individual is providing their services to a client via an intermediary. Now, to use a practical example, let's say Joe is a consultant and Company A want to engage Joe as a consultant. Joe provides those services via his own personal service company, so Joe Limited. The company pays Joe Limited the fee, and because it's being paid to a company, there are tax advantages in terms of it can be taxed at a corporation tax. Joe can take payment as dividends. So that's why this all came about. HMRC don't like that, particularly if they see it as a way of avoiding employment taxes. So if Joe is really, but for that company existing, an employee for tax purposes of that company, then what HMRC say is under what's called IR35 legislation as it is now, Joe's company has to pay taxes as though Joe is an employee, so employment taxes. Now, if that's a genuine company that works for lots of different clients and is a business in its own right, these rules don't apply. It's taxed in the normal way. It's if effectively Joe would otherwise be an employee for tax purposes. Now, at the moment in that situation, the tax liability is Joe's company's liability. As of the 6th of April, any payments made by the client company to Joe's company, the employment tax liabilities will sit with that company. So that's potentially, some businesses engage a lot of consultants in this way. That's potentially an increased liability because they will now have to pay income tax and national insurance contributions that they weren't paying before. So that's a significant potential liability, and it's also going to lead to clients and contractors having to change the way in which they work going forward. Now, importantly, in terms of which client companies this applies to, under the new legislation, it's only medium and large companies. I won't go into what the definition of that is, but it's only at the moment what's classed as medium and large size companies. The other important thing to just note is that these changes are already in place in the public sector. So the important thing, I think, is if you engage consultants or you are a consultant that works via an intermediary company, it's important to identify if these changes are going to apply to you. If they do, understand what type of arrangements you've got in place and whether those arrangements need to be looked at as a result of these changes. Speak to your contractors because it's going to impact upon them and how they work, and look at your internal system. So is your payroll going to be applicable and work with these new arrangements, your HR management systems, your onboarding systems. So it's a potentially big change for these businesses that are affected by it. What I'd advise is it's important to get to grips with them now. Speak to your tax advisor, speak to your lawyer. And we've actually got a free guidance note that I'd be happy to circulate to anyone who'd be interested. And it just sets out the basic principles, whether it's likely to apply to your business or not.
I'll do another plug then. Sign up to our newsletter and we'll make sure that we get you that guidance note.
No problem.
So obviously in business in the past, I've employed loads of people that I refer to on a personal basis. It might be Sarah at the website company as an example, or it might be Peter, the social media guy. When the invoice comes in, it might be, as you've just said, it might be Peter Smith Limited or whatever it be. But I'm actually dealing with my web development, shall we say, via Peter directly, mobile phone, email, so forth. Am I right in saying that if Peter is only working for me, in essence, in another parallel universe, he could literally just be in my office working as an employee, potentially you would be caught by these regulations. Whereas if Peter's web development company is working with however many other different businesses, then he'll generally be a genuine consultant for the purpose of these actual regulations coming into place.
In a nutshell, yeah, because what it's looking at is, but for that company, would Peter be an employee of your company? It would only impact on your company if you're a medium or large company. And it's also worth looking actually at the gov.uk website, because they've got a lot of information about these changes, but also they have some information around what legal tests would be applied to determine if Peter is an employee for tax purposes or not. So there's a lot of guidance on the government website that employers can tap into.
Fantastic. Now, one of the items you mentioned, written terms for all workers, and I think the key there is workers. We didn't reference employees there. It seems a bit crazy, and we're 2019 just finishing now, we're still talking about written terms. Tell us a little bit more about the definition between workers and employees and what people need to do in order to fulfil written terms, and particularly April 2020?
Well, in simple terms, an employee is at one end of the scale. Someone who's in business on their own account and self-employed is at the other. A worker falls in between the two. So they're not quite as committed and connected to the business as an employee, but they're not in business on their own account. So typically that can be people who work casually on an as and when basis. They're often classed as workers as opposed to employees. And the changes that are coming about at the moment, there's an obligation to provide a written statement of particulars of employment to all employees within 2 months of them commencing employment. As of the 6th of April next year, there will be an obligation to provide those written particulars to all workers, so it broadens the scope. There will be an obligation to provide that information on day one or before day one of working, and there's additional information. So at the moment, things like job title, salary are included in the written particulars of employment. That's going to expand to include things like an idea of how long the job's likely to be to last for, details of any probationary periods, and things like that. Now, a lot of contracts of employment will include this information, but as a result of this change, what every employer is going to have to do is look at what written statements they provide to workers and employees and ensure that they cover all of the various topics that the legislation requires them to include. And they'll also need to look at how they provide that, because previously someone could come in and then a month or so later they could provide that written statement. Now it's got to be ready at least by day one of employment. So all employers are going to need to look at the method of providing it and what exactly they do provide to employees before next April.
Fantastic. And I would say that if you employ, I'd say 20 or less, I think the Business Legal Club, in terms of the internal resources we offer, there's a fantastic resource for you. Doesn't always work out this way. Some people might have under 20 employees and still want the added protection. We have a HR and employment solution, like I referenced before, that involves Michael and Friets, which is offers a whole range of different products, and I couldn't recommend that more highly. So if you're looking at your employment and HR solutions internally, then definitely give the Business Legal Club a look, and you may also benefit from Michael and Friets' expertise there also. The fifth topic you mentioned, something quite close to my heart, engagement and culture in business. Tell us a bit more about your views on that, Michael, and what you think that HR professionals and employers should be looking at here.
That's obviously a massive topic, and I'd assume this has probably been on, if we've done this list at any point in the last 100 years, it was probably to some extent on there. And I think the important thing is having a good culture then feeds into getting the right talent, ensuring the company is productive, all of those positive things. And nowadays, what we see in the workforce is it's not enough just to pay good wages. Employers must have flexible working policies. They must offer a good work-life balance. Employees are concerned about, is my employer interested in the local community? Are they concerned about sustainability in the environment? Do they treat people in the right way? So culture is a massive, massive issue. Lots of working parts, involves lots of different parts of a business. But from a HR point of view and from a legal point of view, there are things that I think can be done that feed in to a positive culture that will then bring about all those other benefits. I think for me, the starting point has always got to be, you look at the structure you have in place, policies, contracts, how does HR and the business engage with employees? And that doesn't just mean, for example, creating lots of policies. Sometimes it means taking policies out and giving employees that responsibility, treating them as adults, making sure that your policies are written in the right way that reflects the culture your business wants to create.
And so that people understand them.
That's a massive one, yeah. There's lots of policies that people don't understand, and that causes tons of problems, and it creates that barrier between the business and its people, which obviously are the most important asset that any business has. Another important one from my point of view is training, and you can obviously give managers training on what unfair dismissal means, how our grievance policy should be ran, but it's also helpful for managers to have training on things like difficult conversations. As an employment lawyer, you see one of the big issues is managers not dealing with things because they don't like confrontation, because they're nervous, because they're too close to the employee. So training on those soft skills is really beneficial, sitting behind on top of really good policies and structures. Then there's two that are linked for me is listen to your employees, obviously, and what they want and how they want the business to work, but also listen to what's going on outside and how society is changing, what expectations are different, because there's no point you being as a business in this little cocoon with policies that are 20 years old. An example would be around the internet and social media. 10 years ago, if there was a policy around them, it would be don't use them in work time. Now most businesses have policies that encourage you to use them in the right way for the business's benefit and your benefit. And then following on from that is ACT, is that if you do listen to employees, don't listen to them and then do nothing. Actually do something about...
Businesses would never do that.
But also act in the sense that doing the hard things. If someone's not performing, you've actually got to speak to them about it. Don't just sit there and wait until it's too late and you want them out the business. Actually act on these issues. And then finally is, something I advise clients a lot is be human. A lot of us, I certainly love The Apprentice, but they've got this impression that in business it's all about walking over other people and backstabbing. But if you treat people with a bit of respect, you're polite to them, you treat them as fellow human beings, you'd be amazed at how you can avoid problems and how you can create a much better culture. And the number of times I've seen cases that would have never been before me, had people just thought, how would I like to be treated? And for me, do those things, and from a HR employment law point of view, you are going to get towards the right type of culture.
And if you're a business owner watching this, or if you're a HR professional needing leverage, because you've got to have the buy-in of the senior decision makers or the business owner, depending on the size of the organisation, it does impact on the bottom line. Gallup have said that you get, with high employee engagement, you get 20% higher sales, 67% lower employee turnover, 10% higher customer ratings, increased profitability. And being honest, it's passionate for me because I've made huge mistakes in this area. I grew up business-wise and life-wise on the basis that it was an automatic thing that you work as hard as you can, work crazy hours. I'd gone into a law firm at 16 years of age, which I won't name, but if mistakes happened, you'd have files thrown across the room. I've seen files bounce off walls. Sort of a culture of fear, almost like a sort of Marco Pierre White restaurant from the 80s, really. And I think by the time I sort of got into senior management, you obviously want to be a lot softer than that. But I think there's a lot of people in business who get to that stage that almost get frustrated, if you like, and they think that the biggest chokehold on their business is suppliers, or it's the environment, or it's the sector, government changes, their employees, I just can't get the staff. And certainly myself, I made huge mistakes in this area, learned a lot. And the biggest chokehold on that business was me and whoever the decision makers at the time were, and whoever the owners of the business were. And I think now, you look at companies like Zappos and companies in America that have just got an amazing induction process, incredible training. And in a way, it's like any environment, if the rules are clear at the start and you have the right culture in place, and I would cite Donna Scully and John Carpenter as two people who have done this absolutely magnificently. They have a great corporate and social responsibility program in place, but you will know in interview whether they're going to fit your culture, and they will also know, by the way, whether that's an environment to go into. And I think it's something that is worth investing the time in, no matter what you think. Whether you think you're brilliant at it or poor at it, it's well worth investing a bit of time to make sure that your engagement and the way that you interact with your employees and your business culture is as high and as optimum as it can be. If that's something that you feel you need outsourced help with, please get in touch with us. We have a lot of experts in the Business Services Club. We have people like Michael via the Business Legal Club that can help you with stuff like that if you want to outsource. And Michael, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the show. I think it's been fantastic. I hope you've all enjoyed today's show also on the biggest issues businesses are facing in HR. A reminder that via the Business Legal Club, you can access lead-in business solicitors for free and obtain no obligation quotes. You can also access legal documents and HR support. We've created 2 very different HR packages, which I'm confident will suit every business. The first is an internal HR solution, ideal for businesses, in my view, with 20 employees or less. All those documents are updated, so some of the changes were referenced in April 2020. You wouldn't have to worry about regulations and things changing from a document perspective. The second option is a bit more common in the market, which is a fully outsourced HR solution involving a telephone support line, training, insurance, documents and advice. The difference with this one is you've got top solicitors working for you. The pricing is very similar to what you get from HR consultants, and you can get a free quote with absolutely no obligation by coming through the Business Legal Club. So have a look at businesslegalclub.co.uk. Remember to sign up to our free newsletter. Thank you and goodbye.